My next guests are four extremely funny and talented men in the Star Trek world and in the real world. They are joining me now to discuss something that doesn't get talked about a lot in Star Trek, even though it is a core part of the franchise and has been since the early days of the original series. I'm talking about comedy. Specifically, some of the hilarious B-stories from Star Trek's past and how they paved the way for new frontiers, like Star Trek Lower Decks, which has the honor of being Star Trek's first animated comedy. I can't think of any better panelists to hop on for this discussion than Lower Deck's own showrunner, creator, and executive producer, Mike McMahan, comedian and Pod Directive co-host, Paul F. Tompkins, and last but not least, two men I affectionately call my space dads, Jonathan Frakes and Brent Spiner. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me on this First Contact Day.
Pleasure to be here, Will.
Glad to be here.
Thanks, Will.
Will, thank you.
Because it is First Contact Day, I am curious to know from each of you, what was your first contact with the Star Trek franchise? Johnny, let's start with you.
I met a bald English guy on the lot at Paramount. And he said, do you know where the makeup trailers are for Star Trek? And I said, I think they're right over here, according to this map.
Yeah.
And he said, are you going there as well? I said, I am. When I said, who are you playing? He said, I'm playing Captain Picard. And that was the first I'd ever had any contact with Star Trek. I was under a rock.
Wow.
About the original series. Jeannie, my beautiful wife, Jeannie Francis, had a poster of Captain Kirk on her bedroom wall. And when I was auditioning for the show, she encouraged me that maybe I should find out a little bit more about the roots, the core of this cultural icon.
When I was a kid, the original series was in syndication, and I absolutely loved it. My brothers and I had the original Star Trek bridge play set with the transporter that you would spin around. Yeah.
Oh, man.
That 60s aesthetic and it being in space and everybody was so cool, looked so cool, and I loved it immediately.
I was an 80s, 90s kid, and TNG was a show that my folks watched, and my very first recollection, there was kids TV and then there was grown-up TV. And TNG was the first show that I remember being like, wait a minute, am I edging into grown-up TV now? Because I very distinctly remember on my like rabbit-eared fuzzy television an image of Geordi LaForge in a tree. And I remember being like, well, usually what my parents are watching, not very interesting. But what I'm seeing right here is pretty interesting to me. Having gone back, I've never found that image of Geordi in a tree again. I'm pretty sure I don't. I'm pretty sure that never happened. There's no big Geordi in a tree episode. But once you get that first hit, you have to sample all of it, and it never lets you go.
I think I missed the first airing of the show. However, when I was in college, a friend and I used to come home from school and watch the reruns of the original series.
What were you about to say before you, right between you came home and you watched it?
Came home and turned on the TV and watched it.
Yeah, great.
And that is all that ever happened. Mike, when we had you on the Ready Room last season, you talked a bit about how Next Generation's B stories really inspired the DNA of Lower Decks. It was so interesting to me. I think people who didn't hear it before would be really interested in hearing it now.
There were two kind of shows going on all the time with TNG. There was the big dramatic show. There was the thing of the week. There's a glowing orb on the ship. There's a crystalline entity. There's a planet with a bunch of people wearing shirts that have triangles on them that are out to get you. Like there's morality plays happening. But then at the beginning of every show, there's also those downbeats. Hey, we're in the middle of Data trying to paint, or Wes is hitting on a Dauphine, or there's something happening that's just in the regular lives of the crew before the big episodic dramatic story sort of kicked in at the end of the, that would launch to the opening credits, and then we'd be into it. I loved the little ins, like the little check-in on the family of the crew at the beginning of the episode. What ostensibly wasn't the main grab of the episode. When I was pitching Lower Decks, the original pitch was, I want to invert that formula. I want the show to be a comedy that is mostly about the little social emotional things that are happening on the ship. And occasionally we're checking in with why the lizard people and the rat people don't get along. But that's not super important because there's 700 something episodes of Star Trek that deal with that, but there's very few that deal with everybody forgetting somebody's birthday and how that's a crisis.
One of my favorite performers in all of Star Trek, and certainly one of my favorite performers on Lower Decks, is Tawny Newsome. She is amazing. We had her scheduled to sit with us today, and then we lost her because she is busy and fancy, and we love her, and we're very excited. We're very, very excited for her. This is why you have a Star Trek panel featuring 4 white guys. We are aware of it. For diversity, we chose some white guys with beards and some white guys without beards. We are super aware of it, Star Trek fans, and I apologize. I will not choose to speak for everyone, but we are aware of it. Paul, you co-host the official Star Trek podcast, the Pod Directive, with Tawny Newsome. You have had a ton of funny guests on that show. It is very clear that you are a big fan. And I was wondering if you had any personal favorite B stories or funny moments from Star Trek that you want to highlight.
There's a specific thing with sci-fi, I think specifically with sci-fi, more so than any other kind of dramatic genre, that when it lightens up, as a fan, it is the most glorious thing because it really feels like we're being a little sneaky, we're being a little naughty, and we're going to do this. We're going to have these moments, and in the midst of this very serious, high-stakes show with a lot of adventure, a lot of action, it always feels like a real treat. And so, whether it's the Tribbles or like so many Deep Space Nine episodes that were so funny, like anytime I was a big fan of Rene Aubergenois, and to see this guy with no facial features communicating, being put upon and annoyed by things is always a delight. And the movies the humor in the movies is something that I really love because you don't get to see this that often. There's a shift in the vibe of the movies when they are being funny. It feels much more real and much more the way people talk to each other and the way they're funny with each other. And it feels more like a party at someone's house where it's like, it's just us. There's no danger of strangers stopping by here. This is just the gang and we can be whoever we want to be. As a comedy guy, I really feel that shift and I love it.
Johnny, you've directed more Star Trek, I think, than anybody on planet Earth, and you've done TV and you've done movies. Would you talk a little bit about directing comedy and sort of what it's like when you've spent so many years doing some really intense scenes with people where we are constantly busting up off camera to bring that energy on camera and keep it within the expected boundaries of the characters?
First of all, Tompkins' point is really smart. That's a great observation.
Oh, thank God.
So I'm thinking about First Contact. I'm thinking about the behavior of Marina's drunk scene in particular with Cromwell. And you're always on the verge of something playful. And when I'm directing, I encourage people to try anything. I don't believe that there are, we can make mistakes. Because our show was so serious, especially in the first few seasons, our behavior, because Gene I remember he encouraged me to have a Midwestern Gary Cooper glint that I was never to smile, which was an absurd direction. But that was the thing, that he wanted that for Riker, but then he had cast me, so that I didn't quite fit in that. But our behavior was an expression of how humans need to explode and laugh. I mean, the reason that Worf wrestled Picard to the ground, and the reason that Brent did a Vegas act on the bridge was because most of the work we were doing was meant to be serious, and we couldn't be serious for that long.
Brent, I had the privilege of sitting next to you on the bridge of the Enterprise for several years. So I knew that you were hilarious when we were working together because I had seen you on Night Court. And I know that Rick Berman brought you over because he had worked with you over there. Did you know that Data would have as many comedic moments as Data ended up having? Was that part of the pitch from the beginning, or is that something that just was naturally kind of growing out of who you are as a person over the years?
In reality, we had humor in the show. I'm not so much in the pilot particularly, but from the very first episode, Naked Now. I remember the limerick,
Yeah. Oh my God.
There was a young lady from Venus whose body was shaped like a...
Captain to security, come in.
Did I say something wrong?
And then, we got infected with something that made us all silly. And I think it just kind of took off from there. I felt early on that the show was going to have a lot of comic elements to it. And it wasn't necessarily because of me. I think it was built in. First season, we did Big Goodbye. And we got to put on different clothes and be different people. And a silliness came into it automatically. And I think it just grew and grew and grew from there.
Did you have a sense reading scripts back then that like this joke is going to land really hard on a Star Trek audience, or this joke is going to land really hard on kind of like a general audience? Did you think about it in like general comedy terms, like this is going to land, this isn't going to land, or did you just trust the material?
No, I didn't trust the material.
Fair.
I think it wired us to put a spin on things here and there and to try things out.
The guy says, I want a second opinion. The doctor says, okay, you're ugly too. Boom, boom. Was that funny?
No.
I think everybody brought their own comedy into it as well. There weren't really jokes. I mean, in the scripts.
I protest. I am not a merry man.
Well, I mean, that was fun.
Yeah. You know what's really cool about the comedy you guys were doing, though, just from an outside perspective, was every time there was levity or every time you guys were going for a joke and it landed, you still never went to a well of being mean or like punching down. The things that were funny were coming from such an innocent place, but that's why it never broke Star Trek while you guys were doing it. You guys could have funny moments and it didn't diminish the stakes. It didn't diminish what you believed was happening and what was important to these characters. And that kind of comedy is really hard. It's really easy to be mean and blue and swear and do all sorts of gross out sort of stuff. But the stuff that you accomplished, like, it makes you fall in love with the characters even more. And it's so valuable.
Well, you know what? I think that's interesting, Mike, and the behind the scenes, because I was just thinking that may have contributed to the whatever comedy we were able to get into the show was a product maybe of the fact that on the set between shooting, there was so much comedy going on. I mean,
so much.
We laughed and we were raucous and we laughed all day long. And I think somehow that bled into the playing of things.
A lot of people, I think, typically and fairly look at Star Trek as a serious show, but comedy has been a central aspect of the series going all the way back to the original series. And this is a question for the room. Do you think that humor helps give people a more personal stake in what is going on for these characters in the front of the storytelling?
No, probably not, right, guys? No way? Oh, wait, yeah?
It's a weird idea, actually, Will.
I thought we agreed beforehand that people hated comedy.
One of the things that we always aspired to on Next Gen, I think Brent, Patrick, and I specifically, was the incredible comic chemistry that Bones and Spock and Kirk had, where they sort of took the piss out of each other and rolled their eyes at each other and had this wonderful banter about about the other's personality.
I think that the characters appreciated each other's humor, in a way that you're talking about, Johnny, of the original Triumvirate. I still think there were moments all through the show where Captain Picard would find something that Worf did funny, or that, you found that I did funny, or vice versa. It's there. I think it's there.
I think character comedy is so useful in drama to humanize the characters, and not just jokes, but when it's a thing that's only funny because this character said this to this character. That kind of thing makes these people real to you. It makes you feel like you know them, and it inevitably raises the stakes of the drama because you just care about these people that much more because they seem like your friends.
What Jonathan was saying about TOS especially is that set the tone for all the comedy in Star Trek, where it's the type of comedy that it's best friends who know how to make fun of each other best because they love each other, so they can cut them down better than anybody who doesn't know them as well. And it's why you get like, you know, when you get that tone, it makes you feel like the people in not only the characters, but almost like that the crew and the actors all like each other too. And that, you know, Brent said it bleeds across. Like, it does feel like when you have gotten into Star Trek and you do find it funny, it's because these are your friends. It's like an in-joke in a way for the fandom.
Mike, we've talked about how on Next Generation, we were not allowed to improvise. We had to stay exactly on the script. If we changed a word, I don't know what it was like for the rest of the cast. For me, if I changed a word for a synonym, Cosmo, the script supervisor, came over with his pen and his script and was like, you said jumped and the word is hopped. And I was like, okay, sorry. Do you encourage, allow, discourage improvisation in the booth when you're working on Lower Decks?
Highly encourage. I mean, there's some stuff that, you know, nobody wants to improvise on, which is like the technical jargon that makes it feel like Star Trek, like all of the stuff that has to make sense, you know. And then sometimes people will come in and we'll spend a little time being like, okay, here's how you pronounce this so that people aren't tweeting at you for the rest of your life, you know, because you don't want to break that, you know, the fourth wall like that. But at the same time, we usually get a couple takes as written, and then Jonathan can attest to this. Like, actually, so can Paul. That like we get maybe more improvised takes than we do of the scripted takes. I think the first person we cast was Tawny Newsome on Lower Decks, and she's an amazing improviser. And we just instantly knew, oh, this is a show where when we record people, we're going to adjust the show to fit their performances. Like, we're going to let the kind of heart of the characters be coming from what's getting the actors excited. So there's entire characters that changed from their performances in the booth, you know, like, especially one character that springs to mind is this character, Rutherford, who's one of the leads, the engineer. When Eugene Cordero came in, his performance of Rutherford was so singular and so funny. He became this engineer who was so in love with the ship that it really eclipsed everything else. And it was all from his performance. And so a lot of Lower Decks is what, you know, we give the actors something to work with, but then they plus it and they take it in a direction. And then we have to take that and give them even more of what they were giving us, like try to take it into a place that we never could have gotten without them. And I think Jonathan could tell you, like, when he came in, I literally asked him, I'm like, what would Riker have said here that I didn't write? You know, and we were just playing with it a lot to get to. And then I was like, now I'm going to have you talk about jazz.
Give me warp in the factor of
5, 6, 7, 8.
You know, we put that spin on it, but without the comedic instincts of the actors, I think the characters would feel a little bit more written.
Paul, you got to work on Lower Decks as a Mariner's counselor in season 1. I would love for you to talk a bit about how that came together and maybe share a little bit of your recording experience with us.
I think I bullied Mike on Twitter. Is that how it happened?
That's yep. I would say.
Wait, that works?
Yeah, actually, that does work.
It works.
Maybe I'll get back on Twitter.
Somebody else has to start it first. And then you say, hey, yeah. I think someone said you should have me on the show. And then I immediately jumped on that. It was just such a great group of encouraging people. And I did it, you know, during lockdown. So, you know, a nice Zoomer came to my home with a kit that he unpacked in my office and waited outside, this nice young man, and then I recorded it, and then he packed up the little recording kit and left. It was very accommodating. It was very accommodating.
I want to stick with Lower Decks for just a second in an indirect way. Mike, before you were doing Lower Decks, you ran one of my absolute favorite Twitter accounts, which was TNG Season 8, where you pitched hilarious comedic storylines for our non-existent 8th season. I'm going to all kinds of put you on the spot and ask you if you would pitch a Wesley storyline for TNG Season 8. Go.
In TNG Season 8, Wesley's, you know, I mean, first off, we have to get you back from the Traveler, you know, so maybe we find like a beefier Traveler to go and kick your Traveler's ass and like bring you back, a bit of a reverse Traveler. And then, you know, once you're back on the ship, like, people would probably be pretty upset that, like, there hadn't been enough nanobot incidents recently. You know, when Wes was on the ship, there were a lot of nanobots getting out.
A lot of
People were
nanites,
finding nanobots, and it was almost like bed bugs kind of, but nanobots, because you just couldn't get away from them. So, you know, your TNG season 8 would probably be something along the lines of, in order to try to get back to the Traveler, Wesley repeatedly, quote unquote, accidentally unleashes series of increasingly larger nanobots until they are just regular bots, to try to turn back into energy and be able to get back to Traveler business. That would probably be the TNG season 8 version of that.
I am 100% into that. That is now canonical in my head. It may not seem like it now, but at the time when you started Lower Decks, that was a very big risk. Like, taking Star Trek to pure comedy was really, really risky. It had never been done before. So, Mike, now that you're working on season 2, how do you find the balance between having fun with Star Trek and being respectful and loving of Star Trek?
A lot of it is just, you know, first season was very like, we have to prove that we belong here and that we love the thing that you love. And we're not making fun of Star Trek. We actually love it. And that the show is almost based in what me and my Trekkie friends would like talk about after a couple drinks kind of thing. And I think once people got used to that first season, for second season, the balance was how much of our show is reflective on past Star Trek and how much of it is new Star Trek. And when you find that balance, because I say the word balance more than anything else these days, because it's a balance of how much drama is in it that you need to have to make it feel Star Trek, and how much comedy do you need in it to make it feel like a comedic animated show. And it's probably kind of what the writers of TNG were dealing with, because as you guys know, I don't know if you guys know this, but every time a new Star Trek comes out, people are just so excited. They welcome it with open arms. There's never any complaints.
No one ever has a single complaint.
Everybody's like, new Star Trek? All right, I'm down. I think I'll give this 100 episodes before I make any judgments. And and I think you just want to capitalize on that goodwill for as long as you can, you know?
I think you are absolutely right. That is, yes, good call. Brent, Data has done some really delightful things in TNG's B stories. Some of the quirky things Data has done include raising a cat, acting out Sherlock Holmes. Do you have a favorite quirky or offbeat thing that Data ever did on the show?
Data's Day, that episode really kind of highlighted what I was talking about, because that episode, what I was talking about before, because that episode really was a day in the life, and it really did illustrate that we're just living there. And we did so many fun things in that one, and the tap dancing scene with Gates. And you mentioned before, were there things in the script that I knew were going to be funny? I thought of one while we were talking, and it was in the script exactly. And when I read it, I said, there's no way this is not going to be funny. But it was the Data watches Picard sleep scene. We were in a prison cell or something somewhere, and he was asleep. And of course, Data doesn't have to sleep.
I am sorry if I was disturbing you, sir. I will not look in your direction.
It was just built into the scene. There was no way that wasn't going to be funny, no matter who played it or who did it.
Johnny, a little bit earlier, you talked about Riker getting this kind of unreasonable direction to never smile. So he was kind of
about season 3. I think Gene came off that.
So Riker was typically a straight man on the series and in the movies. So how did you approach the toy you got to play with when you get to be comedic, fun, zany Riker on Lower Decks, compared to the Riker who we saw, for example, in Picard, who was like, oh my God, that's the Riker I love. That's the Riker I wish was my dad. Then you're this other Riker who is just hilarious. Like, do you approach those two different versions of the character from different points of view?
Well, I hate to give Mike more credit than he's already gotten, but he created the Lower Decks Riker out of whole cloth. I never thought of that character being quite that nuts, and it was thrilling to have that as the jumping off point and to riff on
We are just about out of time, so I just want to wrap this up with a question for everybody in the room. Humor in science fiction is important. We've established that humor is just flat out important in drama, and it's important in storytelling. The way in which humor is inserted into something which is generally dramatic is really important, and it's very fragile. I just wondered what, if anything, any of you thought about why Star Trek continues to provide fertile ground for injecting humor into the drama.
Let me go first, so then the people that everyone actually wants to hear from can go after.
All right.
I was thinking about this in terms of like, because Star Trek is an ongoing thing in various forms, you can't have it be so serious all the time. You need a little bit of a break sometimes. And especially if you have a series with familiar characters, people that you're going to come to love, you need to have it broken up a little bit so you don't feel bad for them. You know what I mean? You need to see them smiling every once in a while or looking at something and raising an eyebrow and saying that's silly, because you want them to be okay.
Oh, that's so interesting. I love that. You want them to be okay. That's very insightful, Paul F. Tompkins. Thank you for that.
I think Tompkins is on fire today.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Is.
All goes to the side. I thought that was the not unlike the answer I was going to give, which I was thinking specifically of First Contact. But the rhythm of a movie or of a show builds to a certain point, suspense, action, drama, conflict, and then you need some levity to let it resettle so you can build it again, because it doesn't work like that. And that's essentially the bad version of what Paul just said.
I honestly was going to say exactly what Jonathan said.
Yeah.
Oh, my plan worked.
Now, Mike, I know that you were going to say what Brent was going to say, which is what Jonathan was going to say, which is what Paul said. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the last word.
I think that, well, first off, these are brilliant men, and I agree with everything they said. Truly. But on top of that, I just want to throw out that I think that for Star Trek specifically, like definitely comedy and drama helps humanize, helps you care about the people that are going through these kind of high stakes things. It helps you put yourself there. And I think that for Star Trek specifically, because Star Trek has always been, it's science adjacent, right? It is a celebration of the scientific method. It is an aspirational thing. I mean, this is stuff we've all heard before, but I really do think that the reason any of that stuff matters in the form of Star Trek, like the reason that Star Trek is important to every scientist you meet, to every JPL engineer, to the reason that Star Trek gets you into the sciences is because it humanizes it. And the way that it humanizes it is through personal exploration, through the relationships of the characters, through friendships, and through, the work that Brent did being, Data trying to find his humanity, or Worf trying to find his identity, or the way that Spock is trying to navigate this world that he's in, the way that Odo's doing it, the way the Doctor that Bob Picardo portrayed him, like 7 of 9. We see these stories again and again about the search for personal truths and identity truths and who am I? And I really think that the comedic moments in every Star Trek series really caters to personal truth. It really caters to who am I and what brings me joy and why am I out here looking for truth in the first place? Because without that aspect of yourself, then you're just the Borg. But if you're a person, whether you're a Klingon or a human or an android or whatever, like if you can laugh and you can find joy and you can live a life that's more than just collecting data, then those are stories that spark to an audience. Like we can all get behind that. And I think that you have all of this great aspirational stuff with Star Trek, but if you don't have character and you don't have comedy and you don't have these downbeats and these B stories and these things that you're following, it doesn't have as much impact. And I think that's where the comedy really helps with Star Trek.
That is fantastic and an extraordinary place for us to leave it. Gentlemen, thank you all again for this chat today. Thank you for bringing us all so many laughs in and out of Star Trek. Everybody at home, if you want to relive some of the funniest feel-good moments of Star Trek history, you can stream Star Trek Lower Decks, Star Trek The Next Generation, and every other Star Trek series right now on Paramount+. And remember, today, on First Contact Day, we are reviving our Star Trek United campaign, where you can pitch in and lend your support. For every person who tweets the hashtag StarTrekUnitedGives, Paramount Plus will donate $1 to organizations who do the real-world work of championing equality, social justice, and the pursuit of scientific advancement. Happy First Contact Day to you all. Mike, before I let you go, in the spirit of First Contact, or in Lower Deck's case, Second Contact, I heard you may have something to share with us regarding season 2 of Lower Decks.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, we do. We've been working hard on season 2, and there would be no First Contact Day would be complete without a little bit of First Contact with an upcoming season of Star Trek. So it is my pleasure to give the viewers out there in internet land a tiny little mini microscopic sneak peek at what is to come on Lower Decks season 2.
What up? We doing sci-fi stuff today?
Only thing missing is Boimler. He's got to be having the time of his life.
Red alert! I'm starting to think this jam session's got too many licks and not enough comps.
What does that even mean?